Force that. All right. I think that leads us to turning it over to you, Dan.
Sure. Great. So I'm going to quickly introduce Sudhindra, and then we'll be on our way. So Sudhindra is a development manager at JFrog, and he's been a developer and architect, worked a lot across a lot of different applications, U.S. national elections, or sorry, a campaigning application for U.S. national elections, data center automation, auctioning system, worked in publishing as well. So even has some experience with Kubernetes, that magic fairy dust that solves so many problems. But he is going to be talking today about concurrency and also kind of thinking about it in terms of Golang or some of the lessons you can take from Golang into Ruby, I believe. So Sudhindra, please take it away.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you for having me here today. I'll do my marketing pitch in a minute, and then we'll go to my talk. Things that we would like to offer for people here. Share my screen. Yeah. So for today, the slides will be posted there. I think this is the URL to go to rate the talk, and also join the raffle for the Amazon Echo Show. And if you're the kind who scans QR codes, then you can get there this way. So that's what JFrog is happy to sponsor events like this and be at events like this just to get involved in the community and share what we know and get to know. And because of the kind of weird situation that we are in, like 2 years and 1 month, kind of where it is bad that we cannot get out of our house, but I'm enjoying that I'm able to go to these different locations which I can't travel and meet with all these people. I wouldn't have run into any of you on the street, right? So this is a great opportunity for people like me who like to talk to people and meet people. So I take it in that sense. So thank you for having me. We'll go to my talk, and let me know if you are able to see my screen. While I talk, if you have questions, don't hesitate to raise your hand, stop me, or keep on adding the questions to the Slack, to the chat, and we'll cover them at the end as well. I'll start the slideshow. Can you still see the slides? Golang concurrency in Ruby?
Looks good.
Okay, great. All right. So I'll talk a little bit about the problem that we were facing in the Ruby world, and then how my experience from different languages kind of helped us get over that issue, and where we are in the current state. This is like treat this as an experience report and see if it applies to what you are doing, and see if you can derive some value from that. So a little bit about myself. I have been around for a few years, done a few different things. Started on Ruby in 2006, 2007, worked on a bunch of Ruby projects. And then most recently, like 2-3 years ago, I got a chance to work on Kubernetes platform and get into the DevOps world. And I entered there as a Golang skeptic, working on Ruby mostly, but then also trying to work with Golang. And over the course of time, just working through it and understanding Golang, I have come to understand where it fits and where it fits really well. So I have converted. I also get a chance to write code every so often, but not as much as I would like, because as a manager, I have other responsibilities and I have to fight other battles, and I miss the world of writing real code. But the case study that we are going to talk about was something that happened about 6 to 8 months ago at JFrog, and this was the right time. I felt like, oh, I can still write some code and fix some problems that actually affect our real customers. These days, I'm working on a new project, which is a supply chain security solution, which is open source, called Persia, and it is being built in Rust. And every time I'm doing something in Rust, I'm thinking of how would I do it in Ruby, and how easily it would be understood by people in Ruby, and I'm kind of trying to translate that into my Rust code. I'm still trying to stick to dry keep the code readable, and keep small methods and all of that. And while I'm doing that, I'm learning a lot. If you'd like to reach me, there is a way you can find me on Twitter and on my blog. So we are going to talk a little bit about Jim Carrey, actually. I don't know if you expected to see that, but you'll see some of it as the talk progresses. As we know, Jim Carrey is famous for his famous movies, and I feel like there is a comparison that you can draw between Jim Carrey and Ruby. Ruby has similar famous stories. Ruby is nice. Ruby has all these nice tools around it, Rails, and success stories like Spotify and GitHub, right? And Ruby's really loved. The community is loved. The sense of the way the language communicates to people is really embraced by the community, right? And both Jim Carrey and Ruby, I feel like they have the same goal, is to make people happy, right? And that's what Max also keeps on saying in every one of his talk, that his main goal in creating Ruby was to make the programmers happy, right? So that's why I feel like these two things are comparable. I always have trouble when I do slide sharing and slides don't move forward. Okay, so a little bit about Ruby and concurrency, and this is probably well known to all of you. Ruby has threads and thread pools. There is this global interpreter lock or global virtual lock, and if you implement any concurrency, it is really good if you limit it to IO bound concurrency. And if you want to do anything more than that, then you are basically stuck with waiting for the global interpreter lock. But on the other side, that is the sad part, that you have limits on how you can leverage Ruby. But Ruby is also built to make developers happy, right? And I would like to still implement those things using Ruby, and there are some limitations. And let's talk about how we can how we got over those. There are some issues in Ruby where you try, if you try to implement or try to break that barrier, then you hit some real issues, hit deadlocks, timeouts, and there are people writing big blogs about how you should protect yourself from falling into that trap. So you have to be careful when you venture into those areas, right? But Ruby really tries hard to keep it in such a way so that you don't have to go into those corners, and protects you from writing that, right? And that is the idea. So how did this affect what we were building? So it's just a little bit about our application or the problem that we are trying to solve. So at JFrog, if you have not researched JFrog, JFrog has a product called Artifactory, which is a repository for artifacts and a registry for your Docker images and so on. All binaries the same can be stored on that. And we have a product on top of that called X-Ray, which scans those binaries and spits out information about vulnerabilities in each binary, or as we call them, violations. In order to see all those vulnerabilities in your dashboard of choice, like if you have a Datadog dashboard or a Splunk dashboard or what kind of or an observability monitor of your choice, we have built a Fluentd plugin that sits there and listens to those violations and sends and streams them over to your observability monitor, right? And it's very simple in the sense that there is one call we make to get the list of vulnerabilities. Maybe there are 300 of them since the last time we checked. Then for each of them, we go and get the details and then push them over. And then keep on doing this. This is just a daemon that runs and keeps on doing it. And the problem we were facing and people were complaining was that on heavy workloads, I'll give context on the heavy workloads. Every few hours, the app would crash. The Fluentd daemon would crash, and the only solution they had was go back and restart it. And that is not a good DevOps solution, because if you have to do that every 2 days, every 4 days, they are going to just turn it off and not bother about that information, and that's really bad. This really important information about vulnerabilities coming to your dashboard, and you're going to miss out on that. So that is the problem we were trying to fix. And and that is the experience we were having. We had a good intent, but it didn't serve the purpose. The intentions were good, but then because it kept on failing, that's the frustration that the team was experiencing. That's the frustration that our support team was experiencing, and then we would hear it from our sales team as well. So not a good happy situation to be in, right? And I'll show a little bit of code so that you can get a little bit of insight into the details of it. Whatever I'm going to show is also on our GitHub website, sorry, GitHub project, and I'll add a link to that at the end of the talk. So it was built with threads all over. There was a thread started, then there was a shutdown process, and then we had other methods that were creating threads. And it looked like a typical application with thread safety issues written all over the place. And inside the crux, the main part of the application, we had a thread pool, and we were polling and pulling all these violations and trying to push them onto the stream, which will go to the dashboard, right? The things that you would see when you are managing threads. And what used to happen is exactly this. Basically, after every 2 or 4 days, the app would crash. Even in our test system, in our test system, we were able to go up to 7 days, but that's the maximum. And that signaled to us that there is some memory leak happening. Some thread is failing somewhere, and it's very, very hard to debug that. We had put a bunch of debug in multiple places, and this is the exact feeling we had, that we regret adding this feature in here, and how do we get out of this situation? And this has been my experience just building concurrent applications, and even when I was doing a little bit of Go. This is a really, really hard problem to solve, and you need the right primitives to handle it. And threads and thread pools are not the right one, because they require maintenance and management, right? And you need to be really careful where you start, where you shut down, where you join, and keep track of what is happening where. Given my couple of years of experience doing Kubernetes, I saw that Go try to handle this in a more elegant way. There's a concept of Go routine, so you can actually encapsulate all those concerns and handle it more elegantly. And Max was presenting this in the same vein. So how about if we were able to translate those ideas from Golang and have a good implementation within Ruby, and make the app a better experience, right? So it's pretty much like this character of Jim Carrey struggling in his life, and we were looking for the mask. And the mask that I thought was the right magical power that we needed was concurrency, like it was built in Go. So I'll present a couple of slides which talk about concurrency as it is implemented in Go, like a primer, if you're unfamiliar. So Golang has this concept of Go routines, which are similar to threads, but much smaller footprint, and they don't grow. There is no thread local storage. They're much easier to manage and schedule and reschedule, and that is the beauty of Go routines. Go also has this primitive of channels, which is like their preferred mechanism, or one of their preferred mechanisms of exchanging information or communicating with between Go routines. And there are multiple types of channels, buffered, unbuffered, and you can handle them. And Go relies on this principle, do not communicate by sharing memory. Instead, share memory by communicating about it. And what if we were able to translate this into Ruby? There is another concept that I would just want to present from the same Golang book, from the Golang programming language book, which is pipelines. Is about chaining these channels and the Go routines together to achieve, the end, to build the whole flow that you want, and so that you can go from the start of the workflow to the end without losing track of what is happening, right? And without storing any state locally, but keeping track of it. What this concept talks about is actually how you manage where you store state and how you keep on keeping track of that state without losing it in some thread that you were not able to close, or some such what do you call, data handling mechanism that you were not able to keep track of. So I thought that this is also a very powerful concept that would apply to the problem that we are trying to solve. I looked for alternatives, and I found the correct fit for the problem that we were trying to solve. A library called Concurrent Ruby, which I was not aware of before, and I was researching in jest and angst about solving this problem, but I was pleasantly surprised by what this library had to offer. And we'll talk a little bit about the library as well. So this was the mask that I was looking for to power the Ruby world that I was working in. So on reading, I found that there was a group of people who were inspired or thinking along the same lines that I was thinking, and they had already spent so much time in building this library, and they were inspired by all the other these few other languages which were doing concurrency really well, and they wanted to bring that over into Ruby. So I think this started in 2017-ish, I think, and 2017, 2018, they put in a lot of effort, proposed it to Ruby communities, and then got accepted as a project. And since then, there has been really active development. There are comparable or a few other projects in the same line of concurrency and thread safety and all of that. But this seems to be the one which is getting frequent updates. There are issues that are being handled or responded to quickly, and they have very good traffic on their GitHub. So I thought this was something that we could invest time in, given that our application was enterprise grade. We wanted to go with something stable, supported, and which we could rely on. And even though the offering that we are making is on GitHub and open source, we have a team that supports it, and we really have customers paying us money. So we wanted to make sure that we do the right thing by them. Although there's a caveat where the library itself says there are places where if you try to handle threads by yourself, there are places you can get to where it could be really hard to debug and figure out what is going wrong. So what they recommend is sticking to the primitives that have been abstracted out and work with them. So even when doing this, remember that thread safety is still hard. So make sure that the mask doesn't fall in the wrong people's hands, and it could cause disaster. And you would end up in the same situation that Julia and Mike are talking about in their blogs. So while we were doing this, actually, a couple of people on our team asked, why not just do Ruby 3.0? And why don't you? Because Ruby 3.0 was slated to provide first level support. And we researched that, and what we found was Max was talking about Reactor and how async fiber and all of that will work. And at the time that we built this, and I think even now it's still, Reactor is still experimental. So we couldn't really, I couldn't bring myself to put an experimental feature into an app and keep on maintaining it and supporting it. And so we did a little more research to answer that question, and we found that actually Sidekick, which is very popular background processing gem, is using Concurrent Ruby. Rails was using Concurrent Ruby since 2018, I think, if I'm not wrong. So that seemed to be a good answer to why not Reactor. We'll just use whatever is the latest being used by the community, and that will get us the right support that we need. So what was so good about this library and implementation? In this, you don't think in terms of threads, you think in terms of futures, promises, and channels. And there are higher level constructs that mimic these other languages like Golang and Elixir to help you think in those languages, in those constructs, and that helps you deal with the thread safety. Although these don't stop you from running your own thread and destroying your own thread and shooting yourself in the foot. So if you do go down that route, then your mileage will vary. So be careful if you try to slip from the recommendations here. Also, at the time that we used it, the support for channels was released, but it was not well documented. So we looked at the code, and there were enough tests. There were working examples, but we had to dig a little more than when we were reading about promises, because promises was well documented and we could understand and just use that documentation to implement. But the way this particular gem is being maintained is they push code that works, and then they are a little bit behind on providing documents and examples. So we took that with a pinch of salt and did our own performance test to make sure that things work well in our own system, and we just hope that the features get the document gets committed, and then the feature becomes widely available. So while doing this, a few things that we were missing that I had to remind the team and bring it back and do it over and over again is we have missed. So one of the reasons why we didn't catch the issues that were happening in our app was we didn't have a lot of integration tests. We also lacked a number of unit tests where the interactions were happening, which is why in my example you see that a lot of code looks sequential and intermingled, and there's no separation of concerns. So we worked on that first to figure out where are the areas where we can actually implement the Go routing like or promises like functionality. And also we emphasize a lot on bringing in encapsulation and protecting the insides of these concerns that were coming together to build this application. So how did our code actually look after we had built all of this and started using concurrent Ruby? So we had a run method which pulled violations, and then for each of those violations we had so these violations went into a channel, and there was a method that listened to the channel and processed those violations and got details, and then there is another channel that pushes those details to the stream. Yeah, so roughly this is how the code looks like. You can get into the guts of it on the GitHub repo. So basically you can create a channel with a certain capacity. So this is a buffered channel. And since we are doing this on a regular basis, like we try to pull every 30 minutes to just get new violations or new vulnerabilities that have been discovered from our database. So Concurrent Ruby actually provides a timer task, so you don't have to worry about how am I going to run this cron job, or no such DevOps tricks required, and it helps you poll at that interval. And then we just have a processor that keeps on processing the violations that are coming off the violations channel, and since it's blocking by design, we don't have to worry about is there going to be a thread lost in the process or whatnot. Yeah, so we are in good shape. And for every violation, we are again, like to get its detail and to make that HTTP call, like the IO bound concurrent request. Again, we start a promise or a future, and then that gets those details, and then it pushes to another channel, which then streams. So we went all in, if you will. Right. So. And from the get-go, from the time we started introducing these, we started adding unit tests for each of those blocks. And upped our game on the coverage. We also added some integrations tests, which were limited to not making the HTTP calls, because we didn't want to do a lot of network, but at least test the interactions between these objects that we were building. Yeah, so that's the money, right? We were able to actually test how the interactions happen and where the issues could be before the issues happen in real life. So if you're curious, this is where the plugin is, the Fluentd plugin is, and you can look at the code. And also, if you wanted to contribute, you can create an issue and help us move it along. Some of the stuff I have used in the stock came from all these places. By the way, this guy has a very good talk on concurrent Ruby itself, and how he found it, how he uses it, and why he's passionate about it. I learned a lot from that, and also reading the Concurrent Ruby website and their GitHub page. Thank you. That was my talk, and I'm happy. So, any questions or anything you would like to discuss?
Someone mentioned the async gem, and I know that's something that I had heard of before, and we widely use background jobs with Sidekick because it is using the concurrency that they just give us, not knowing that it was a concurrent gem there. Is there a difference between those two? And if, I guess, did you look up the async gem, and why didn't you choose to go that route?
I did not look up the async gem, but this is new information for me. Thank you for bringing it up. I have not looked at this, and so the way I researched this was I would like to do pipelines, channels, Golang like concurrency, and there were a few things that came up, and Ractor came up, as because I looked for concurrency, and Concurrent Ruby came up. And so when was this started?
It's new, and a lot of it was the reason why Ruby, I believe, integrated a lot of this work into its core was due maybe to the async gem, but someone can correct me if that's the wrong assumption there.
Okay. Yeah. So our app was running on 2. something, and we were not ready for 3. Although we have upgraded to 3, and at the time when this was last June when we were building this, at the time Ruby 3 was not supporting Ractor, so that's how far we went in investigating. And Concurrent Ruby seemed to have, like I said, a lot of latest commits, a lot of activity, a lot of latest releases and fixes. So that seemed to be a good business decision.
It's a great business decision.
I'm looking at this chat, and there are a few. I think a bunch of them are about async and async Ruby. Thank you for your comments on the slide. Appreciate it. And there is one more slide that Ari would like to show. Again, send them questions. And is Ari here? Because he was going to do the raffle. No, Ari's not here. Okay. Okay, then Dan, I think maybe you and Ari can figure out, how the raffle can be conducted with all the people here. He has a cool spin wheel and all that, and it's fun. But I think he's got stuck in another meeting today.
Yeah, fair enough. And Dan had to drop off for kid-related things.
Okay.
About
okay.
7:15. So we'll circle back on that, and I'll tell him to reach out to you.
Looks like there are no more questions, but yeah. Yeah. So reach out to me on Twitter, or find JFrog, and you'll be able to find one of us, or you or me. And if you had any questions about JFrog or about what we do, we are more than happy to answer. We are located not only in Sunnyvale, we are in Atlanta as well in the US and a few other places in the world.
Great, thanks so much. Is there any other questions before we wrap up and or switch back to the initial conversation? Well, we really appreciate your time and efforts, and I love to see code and just sort of these ideas and approaches. Super helpful, and we'll all take away, I'm sure, some insight into how to use that in our own apps. So that's great. All right, so we only had one talk. Do we want Joel and Nico, and is Brooke still around? I look, he had to drop off as well, but do you want to circle back to that conversation or sort of wiped out? What are we thinking? Joel's muted.
I mean, all I was going to mention was my concept of the question was, how do we get this into core, and how do we get more people involved? And I think the likes, there's a very long history, and it gets sold by the paradigm, as Joel said. But some of the Uncle Bob, sorry, not Dr. Bob, he's the guy who does beer at Stone Brewing. Uncle Bob, Sandy Metz's, some of the pillars that have written books, and some of the pillars who have talks that are always referenced and always looked back to, and the person that says, like, these are why we have these rules and the way we do things in OOP world. If those kind of people who are the paragons, or the people we look at, would say the same or close to, like, hey, when you really get down to it, like, take the math out of functional programming and take the concepts of what functional programming can be, those two concepts really start to blend together at the end. But we don't have that thought leadership, so you can't expect like a single source. And I know it's Ruby on Rails, but you can't expect Ruby on Rails to delegate how Ruby is programmed.
So I'll share a little bit of my experience, and I did not know that I did not know that Joel came from GitHub, but Tenderlove, for example, Aaron Patterson and some of the folks in the same realm, from my discussions, at least, I found them to be open to such mix and match ideas, and that's how Ruby and Merb came together back in the day, right? Not Ruby, I mean Rails and Merb came together back in the day, and also the major refactoring around Rails 2 to 3 or whatever that was, where all these gems got separated on, and then then you got the switchability. So I think there is room to propose that and sort of propose that as a plug-in kind of a solution for opening that area up. But I think you have to sort of sell it to the people who are willing to talk to you, and then go in that route. Yeah.
I mainly ask this question because I'm trying to slowly troll Brooke into being the one who does that, because I feel like he has enough of the appetite, just a matter of time.
If I can GitHub sponsor me, Joel? Can I earn a living doing that?
Surely you could be one of the 2,000 people we hire this year.
Yeah, I'd love to see it. It would be cool to see it melded. There are some complications though. Like, for instance, the Rails framework, right? It has a lot of inheritance in it, and that's what makes things a little thorny. Like, take for instance controllers, right? You can't technically you can initialize a controller, but you really don't want to, because that leads to some really surprising behavior. But if you could take that away to where you could inject those dependencies a little bit easier, that'd be nice. Active job is another one. You definitely cannot inject anything into those. I mean, you can, but you've got to really work hoops to do it. And so, fixing some of those core things that are big tenets in the Rails framework would take a little bit of effort if you wanted to really really take what Nico was saying there about, like, what everything that Uncle Bob has talked about, what Sandy Metz has talked about, just basic composition. That would take a little bit of finagling within the Rails ecosystem to pull that off well.
And for me, it's more like a long-term question. Like, I think that what this is just making me realize is like how stagnant Rails ultimately is from like a Ruby standpoint. Like, especially over the time I've been in the framework, which is like 8-9 years at this point. Like, there hasn't been as much innovation on the way we do things Ruby wise compared to like, I mean, a lot of the innovation has ultimately been around the front end, right? If you look at like Action Cable and Hotwire and all this stuff that's going on, like, at least as of late, there hasn't been an intention to like actually moving the ball forward on more of the back end side.
Yeah, that's a really good point. That has grown pretty long in the tooth. There hasn't been big changes there. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm wondering if you have had a chance to talk to some of the Shopify guys that they were solving some specific problems that applied to their business, and they were making some fundamental changes, or from what I had seen last time. And I was with Pivotal before, and a bunch of the pivots have gone there, and they're getting excited about working there. So if you're looking to chat with some people, I can share some contacts. Maybe just start a small conversation, see if it blooms into something big.
Any other thoughts before we wrap up? Oh, cool. Nico's taking off. See you, Nico. All right. Thanks everyone for coming out. And again, reach out if you would like to give give us a talk in the future. And lightning talk is a great kind of dip your toe in the water if you're feeling a little shy about it, which is how I got into giving presentations. And it's a nice confidence booster to sort of prepare and give a talk, even in a small 5-10 minute one about anything. So feel free to consider that and reach out on Tech Friends or meet up or email. Great. Thanks again, everybody, for coming. And thank you for speaking to us. Really appreciate it all.
Yeah, appreciate having me.
Yeah,
Thanks.
thank you very much.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, have a good night.
Thanks.